here, and I know a lament that many of you have shared with me. And that lament was, oh, Branko, I wish I would have talked more to my father and mother about what happened during the war. I wish I would have pressed them a little more. I wish we could have just gotten away. I wish I would have tape recorded what they had to say. To my great tragedy in 1990, my mother passed away. She was 67, 68, president of the Colo. And right after that, I got a call from Washington inviting me to come to Washington to take a federal position. My father was a widower. I went to my father and said, Dad, I said, I will not take this appointment unless you move with me. Unless you move with me to Washington. And he said, he said, son, in English, that's called blackmail. I said, it is, but it's the truth. He said, you have to take the appointment. You're the first Serbian American to be appointed to a federal position, first one to be confirmed by the U.S. Senate immigrant. The only two before me were American-born Serbs, and that was Helen Bentley. And I said, fine. So we moved to Washington, and every Saturday for the next 10, 20 years, he and I would go off. We had 3 children with me, my wife, my dad, and every Saturday morning we would go off to a little Greek restaurant called the Amphora, which appears in a lot of spy novels because it's just down the road from the CIA headquarters. And so a lot of people will mention that they met at the Amphora. And so Dad and I would go to the Amphora Saturday morning. Sometimes I take a little tape recorder with me, other times I just have a pad and pencil. And we talk about what was going on in the family life, but I would ask him slowly what happened, how did he get involved, what was his experience, who did he know, and he shared that with me. So I had this great privilege and honor that I know many of you wish you would have also taken advantage of, but in my case, we were there together, we had the time together, and so that inspired me to read more about to see what independent sources have to say. If you do any study of the Serbian Volunteer Corps, keep this in mind. Serbian volunteers were the #1 barrier to Tito's partisan entering Serbia. Recent documents show that the partisans never had more than 700-800 people in Serbia. They had tens of thousands in occupied Croatia and other places, but not in Serbia. And the reason was the Serbian Volunteer Corps. Consequently, they were hated by the communists. After World War II, over 400 movies, entertainment movies, were made by the Yugoslav communist government about the partisan heroes of World War II. And many of those movies, and you can download them off the internet, you will see Dobrovoljci, always portrayed as clean-shaven, well-dressed, and disciplined. But the #1 enemy of the communists. Why? Because they had an ideology. They had Christianity. They had their faith in their country, and so they were very much vilified. So you'll meet people who grew up in Yugoslavia who will only know that story. They'll only know 400 propaganda movies and what they were taught in school about who the Dobrovoljci were and what they were doing. So keep that in mind. It's permeated the internet, where those people have gotten on the internet, communists, sons of communists, grandsons of communists, and perpetuated the myths and lies. But now there's a new generation of independent, objective, political scientists and historians who are pointing things out. And so let's go back a little bit to the period between World War I and World War II. 2 great political movements in Europe. Communism in the Soviet Union, expanding and opening branches and sending armed might to Spain to overthrow a government there and make it a communist government, but also clashes between communists and others in Germany and all through Europe. So communism a driving force being funded and promoted by the Soviet Union under Stalin. The other movement, of course, is fascism, Nazism in Germany under Hitler, in Mussolini, in Italy under Mussolini, in England, the Black Shirts under Sir Walter Mosby, a fascist movement, but no fascist movement in Serbia, in Yugoslavia. There was the Ustaša movement, but in Serbia itself, there was a political movement called Zbor, which means rally, a Yugoslav movement, Serbs, Slovenes, Croatians, Muslims, that was formed based on European, modern, Christian, democrat, socialist principles. There was great corruption after World War I in the Kingdom of Yugoslavia, particularly corruption over the repatriation of money from Germany. They didn't send money, they sent cement and raw materials, which were divided up among friends at court and friends in the government. And there was corruption between the two political parties to the extent that Dmitry Ljotić started a moral movement, a movement dedicated to the people in the church, against corruption and against the incumbent political system of the corrupt political parties. And so he proposed something that we have here in Wisconsin and you have in Illinois, and that is nonpartisan elections. Nonpartisan elections. Here we elect a mayor in Milwaukee, we elect a sheriff, where what we mean by nonpartisan is you can be a member of a political party, but when you go to vote, all you have is that person's name. You vote for the person. There's no indication of the party. And Ljotić proposed a nonpartisan system, and he was accused of advancing a single-party system. That's the way it was worked. Oh, he's against political parties. He must want his party. But the Zbor movement wasn't a political party. It was a movement based on French principles, believed in government communes, it believed in government ownership of capital. It was very similar to other Christian democratic movements in Europe. It was not fascist. They didn't wear uniforms. They didn't march in lockstep in parades. They had no affiliation with Germany or Germans. In 1941, Yugoslavia, the kingdom, was attacked by every one of its neighbors except Greece. Austria by then was part of Germany, Hungary was part of the Axis, Bulgaria was part of the Axis, Romania was part of the Axis, Italy was a part of the Axis, Albania, every one of Yugoslavia's neighbors invaded with the Germans and lopped off a piece. The Germans recognized the independent state of Croatia, which declared war on the US and started its campaign of genocide against the Serbs and Gypsies and Jews in its occupied territory. The Croatian Ustaša didn't get Croatia. They got what was called civil Croatia, the area around Zagreb, and they got Bosnia and Herzegovina. Dalmatia was given to the Italians. And Montenegro was given to the Italians. And actually there were two Italian noblemen. One was appointed the king of Croatia, and the other was appointed the king of Montenegro. Wisely, neither one stepped foot in the country where they were made the king. So here we have Yugoslavia invaded by every one of its neighbors. The Serbian part of the Yugoslav army is sabotaged by the Croatians and others who wanted an independent state of Croatia. Prince Regent Paul, one of three regents, a Croatian regent, a Slovenian regent, and a Serbian regent, received letters in 1940 from Dmitry Ljotić begging him to reorganize the Yugoslav army, telling him that if there was a war, the Croatians wouldn't fight for Yugoslavia, and that he ought to have at least one division of Serbian-centric troops that would actually defend the country. As it turned out, an army which had defeated the Austrians in World War I, an army which had won multiple Balkan wars, collapsed within 10 days in 1941 when the Germans attacked. Yugoslavia divided up among its neighbors. The Romanians got the peace they wanted, Hungarians got the peace they wanted, Italians took Dalmatia and Montenegro. Bulgarians got the peace they wanted, and what was left was a little bit of Serbia. General Nedic, the Germans wanted a government there to have somebody to deal with. They called General Nedic, who had been Minister of Defense, was a World War I hero. 4 times he refused. He refused to set up a government. The 4th time he was called in, the German general had a map, the map of Yugoslavia with no Serbia on it. It showed Serbia being divided up between Romania, Hungary, Albania, and the German allies. And he said, if you don't accept, there will be no Serbia. Nobody will be there to protect the Serbian people. And so he relented. And there is a movie available on the internet about this. There's a new play that was shown in Yugoslavia the last 5 or 7 years, and this is all dramatized in the movie. So I'm telling you could actually watch in a movie version. He formed the government under the Geneva Conventions. Dmitry Jokic was a French-trained expert in constitutional law. And Nedic was well advised. Everything they did was according to the Geneva Convention, which didn't foresee guerrilla warfare. The Geneva Convention of the 19th century foresaw a country being occupied and then how a country would be run. And an occupied country had the right to have a government, a civil government, and had the right to have an internal police force to keep order. And so the Serbian Nedic formed the government. Right after he formed the government, there was a tremendous train explosion. A munitions train exploded in Smederevo with the equivalent of an atomic bomb, and it leveled the city of Smederevo, the hometown of Dmitry Jokic. The downtown was leveled, buildings collapsed, and a call went out to volunteer, and a couple of hundred young men from Zbor, who had been in Belgrade, Zbor had a dormitory there, rushed to Smederevo the day after the bombing and started digging for survivors in collapsed buildings. This was in the summer of 1941. In the first few weeks, they found survivors. For the next weeks into August, my dad was one of them. He said, we take our handkerchiefs and dip it in vinegar and put it over our mouths because the stench of the rotting flesh was so bad. But they were able to dig out. That group of young men then returned in September of 41 to Belgrade, where General Nedic decided to form his special force, and the Serbian Volunteer Corps was formed on the 15th of September 1941. Prior to this, the Chetniks were formed with General Mihailovic moving into Ravna Gora, but not taking much action. In Serbia. There's a tremendous difference between the Chetniks in Serbia and the Chetniks in the Croatian-occupied and Italian-occupied territories. In the Croatian occupied, in Lika, Kordun, what they call the Tromeđa, we had Vojvoda Đujić, where we had actual genocide against the Serbs. And in Herzegovina, we had Vojvoda Jevđević, also organizing to protect the Serbs against genocide. They took arms from whoever they would give them a rifle. That genocide caused some of the local people to join the first armed group that would come to their village and give them a rifle. In some cases, that first group was the partisans. And so some joined the partisans not because they were ideologically communist, but because this was a group that was fighting against the Ustaša. In the other communities, the Chetniks came first, gave them a rifle or asked them to bring their rifle and join. And so we had the two groups there, but we had the active murder of tens of thousands of Serbs, the creation of the only non-German concentration camp at Jasenovac, and that spurred large numbers of people to go into the partisans and to go into the Chetniks. Not so in Serbia. Not so in Serbia. In Serbia, the partisans were few. There were never, recent professors and analysis have indicated, in all of Serbia, from 41 to 45, there was never more than 900 partisans out of a population of some 3-4 million. And this was because communism was not attractive, and the Serbian Volunteer Corps was there to put it down. After the Soviet Union came into the war, remember the Soviet Union was an ally of Germany. They both attacked Poland, divided Poland, and now late Operation Barbarossa in late 41, finally Germany attacks the Soviet Union, and it engages and tells its partisan units, now you should fight against the Germans. And way after the Chetniks had already been done. The Germans instituted a rule that for every German soldier killed in an occupied country, where the war had, the country been defeated, 100 civilians would be killed, and for every German soldier that was wounded, 50 Serbian civilians would be killed. So 100 to 1. Nowhere else in Europe was that kind of retaliation established, 100 to 1. Only in Serbia. Only in Serbia. So, and Serbia, what happened in Serbia was not going to, at that point in early 1941, was not going to change the course of the war. Remember, the United States was neutral. The United States had bailed out Europe 20 years earlier in World War I. United States had a very tremendous movement against entering the war under the famous Charles Lindbergh, America First. They were not going, Lindbergh had been an ace in World War I. He had fought against the Germans. He said, we went over there, my friends died to help Europeans, and now they're at it again, we don't want to help them. So Europe was on its own in early 41, and the Germans instituted this 100 to 1 retaliation, in return for which General Nedić formed the Serbian Volunteer Corps, telling the young men, and they were all young men. My father was one of the oldest. He was 21. They were told, if you give your life to protect a German soldier from a partisan, 100 Serbs will be saved. That was what they were told, and that's what they believed. That I put my life forward, and I can save, every time I stop a partisan attack, I can save 100, 200, 500, many more Serbs. Before the Serbian Volunteer Corps, right as it was being formed, there was a massacre by the Germans in Kragujevac. They killed, I think, 2,400 or so people. They selected them. The Serbian Volunteer Corps had just been formed. There was a young officer there. He didn't know what to do. He wasn't in charge. The Germans were in charge, but he was there and witnessed the event, and for which some have blamed the Serbian Volunteer Corps in its early days for not stepping in, which wasn't their function. Now, nobody blamed the partisans who killed 14 German soldiers and then ran into the forest and hid. They didn't come back to attack the Germans after that. They killed and mutilated the bodies of these Germans and then went back into the forest. So consequently, the Serbian Volunteer Corps, under the auspices of the Geneva Convention, was formed as a Serbian military unit, but it was made up of the former members of SBOR and others, including Serbians, Slovenians, Croatians, some gypsies, and even some Jews came in with pseudonyms that they were protected within the group. The first Serbian Dobrovoljci, volunteer to be killed in action, was named Fizulic. He was a Bosnian Muslim, member of SBOR. Fazic. I knew I'd get it wrong. Thank you. And so this was this unit that was formed to protect the Serbian people, and is exactly what it did. They also worked with the official Chetniks under General Vojvoda Kosta Pečanac, And so they were together with that Chetnik group. The Chetniks under General Mihailovich, later documents show the Nedic government provided Mihailovich with arms, munition, and protection. It was very, very suspicious for the Germans when the volunteer corps would report how many partisans they had found and killed, but they couldn't find General Mihailovich for some reason. He was much better hidden. So they could find some obscure partisan in Shumadia, but they couldn't find General Mihailovich and Ravnogorod. And the reason is they didn't want to find him. They were in contact with him. Boshko Kostic, who lived here in Milwaukee, was the liaison between Mihailovich, Dmitriev, Yokovich, and the government. He writes about that in his memoir. So keep in mind when you're reading, Zbor was not a fascist movement. They were not collaborators in the sense of Quisling. They did not want the Germans to come in. They did not invite the Germans to come in. The Serbian Volunteer Corps did not wear German uniforms. They wore uniforms of the mountain troops. They pledged allegiance to the king of Yugoslavia and the fatherland, and they were totally under the direct command of the Serbian command. So they were not, individual field units were not under the command of individual German army units. Yes, they did coordinate their anti-partisan activity, but that was their function. So the notion of collaboration is a little gray to the extent, unlike Quisling, they did not welcome the Germans. They did not. They were not a sabotage group to bring the Germans in. They didn't want the Germans in. They weren't part of the German army. General Nedic refused to allow any Serbians to go to be sent to the Eastern Front, even though the Germans had gotten their real allies, including Croatia, to send troops to the Eastern Front against the Soviet. Nedic adamantly refused, and so there was no Serbian ally or collaboration with the Nazis. As my father told the German officer, "I'm not fighting for your Führer or for your right. I'm fighting for my people," when he was asked to do something. And that was the position that all of the Serbian Dobrovoljci took, and that was the official position of the government. You heard about the insignia. Their insignia was what was called the Karađorđe Cross. It is a circular cross used by the king of Yugoslavia, the king of Serbia, when he gave his Karađorđe decoration. And in the middle of the Karađorđe cross, the design included the St. George, the Slava of the Serbian Volunteer Corps. Their uniform was the uniform of the mountain troops. They had no insignia that had anything to do with Germany or the German army or the German Reich. At their maximum, they had about 9,000 men, and they had a hospital, and some of your mothers and grandmothers were attached to the hospitals. My mother was, and some of your others. We have the pictures of all the sestra and nurses with the hospital. We had Dr. Dragola Pivac, who lived here, was one of the doctors at the hospital. We had a young Serbian Dr. Stanisic, who was with them. He died. There was an outbreak in 1945 in Slovenia of Tegavi typhus. We had quite a few casualties there from the typhus epidemic. Young Stanislavovich died there. I later met his sister, who was a librarian in Washington, D.C., and was able to tell her that I remember my mother telling me that her brother died in my mother's arms in the typhus case. So all of you have these unique stories. You should remember them, write them down, collect the information that you have. Somewhere we'll find a repository for the truth about the Serbian Volunteer Corps. I don't know where that repository will be, but we will look for it. We'll look for a place. As I said, there are some young Serbian political scientists and historians who are publishing the truth. A recent document did a thorough analysis of the Zbor movement and said it was not a fascist movement based on understanding of what fascism is, what fascism stands for, and these are important things that are happening. Our parents were subjected to, as Father Matej pointed out, abuse
Yep.
They were subjected to misinformation. There were Chetnik units here in Milwaukee, people from the Chetniks here in Milwaukee and other cities who had originally been partisans and switched at the last moment. Oh, by the way, the Ustasha army at the last moment converted to partisan, and none of them paid a price for what they did because they supported it. On that, I will stop, take a few questions, and thank you for your attention. I have a specific question.
Oh, yeah.
There is a
Okay.
book over there labeled Belgrade's Best.
I have it.
It is misleading to the extent that, and I know the author, he did not do this maliciously, but he tried to find sources, and the only sources available to him were sources outside of Yugoslavia. So he did not have access to General Mushitsky's papers, General Nedic's paper, and other papers. What he had access to was some German documents, but what he found was some German supply documents, which indicated that the Germans were supplying the Serbian Volunteer Corps, which nobody disputes. But the supply went from the Wehrmacht to the SS, and that didn't make them SS troops. And there's the implication that somehow they became SS troops when the supply at 45, and they actually didn't get any supply. This is all just German administrative paperwork saying, well, the Wehrmacht doesn't have any supplies, the SS does, so the SS in late 44, 45 they'll supply them, and somehow there's imputing that there's a connection with the SS. There's no connection whatsoever. By the way, remember, the United States entered the war in December of 1941, not because it wanted to, but because it was attacked at Pearl Harbor. And the United States did not declare war on Germany. It declared war on Japan. Germany declared war on the United States. By that time, the people in Europe, all of the people who had been officers in the First World War, including Dmitry Gottich, who had been a lieutenant colonel, remembered that it was a 2 million man American army that came to Europe and put down the Kaiser. And there was no question in anybody's mind that in the next few years, now that the United States was in the war, 2 million Americans, Canadians, and others would be coming over to defeat Germany. So as Dmitry Gottich said, Hitler is a huge boulder at the top of the hill, and as he's rolling down the hill, he will knock over trees and anything in his way, but eventually he'll hit the bottom. And that's what happened.
Thank you, Branko. Our grandfather wrote a 4-volume